fairly late in the book. What has happened is it's a small town in Nebraska, and due to various circumstances, a woman appears to have gotten access to an advanced copy of a children's book that's about to come out, a very coveted advanced copy that no one else in the world should have. It's a book by a man named Milton Muscatine, who has written book 11 in an 11-book series. And so he's written the final appearance of these characters named Miranda and Desiree, who live in an asylum for girls. And it's a sort of gothic horror children's series. And it's the best-selling children's series in the history of time, basically. And so, and Milton Muscatine himself is a bit of a sort of a pompous, derelict kind of a person who enjoys his riches and enjoys inflicting pain on those who infringe on his copyright. And so it's so now we have this woman reading, who claims to have gotten this advanced copy. She's reading it on a CD radio from a farm in Nebraska, and as a result, people have tuned in. They've made special efforts to get CD radios so they can get the reception, and then others then are transcribing them and putting them on the internet. And so it's getting all a little bit out of hand. Meanwhile, Milton Muscatine claims that that's not his book at all, that that's not an advanced copy. But much to his chagrin, everyone's absorbed in this version that they're hearing on the radio and losing interest in book 11 that's about to come out, which is causing his publisher some concern. But one of the characters in my novel is a girl named Tiff, short for Tiffany, who's 13, and she's been listening to Daisy's reading on the radio, and finding that she's not engrossed. So what was missing from Daisy's chapters? Maybe it was simply the illustrations. Without the signature drawings by Muscatine's longtime collaborator, the former underground cartoonist with a view of Alcatraz from his attic window, Miranda and Desiree felt a touch foggy. Slink, the one name by which the illustrator was known, only ever contributed about 10 illustrations to each 300-plus page book, but there were just enough portraits to remind us that, though always unsettled, always unhinged, Miranda and Desiree could, like anybody, be lulled into moments of optimism. Every horrific twist shocked them, no matter how many hundreds they endured. We could see it in their rosy cheeks and wide eyes. The worst imaginable things befell them in this worst imaginable of worlds, but they could always soothe each other into something resembling serenity. Or maybe it was the fact that Daisy's book wasn't a book at all, no matter who wrote it. Tiff needed the words on the page to become the voice in her head, her own voice, or an approximation of it. And she needed the soft paper and the sound of the scratch of her chapped fingertips against it as she fiddled with each page, anxious to turn it. She needed to sit in the creaking easy chair with the pilled fabric in the corner of her uncle's sunniest room. Her Uncle J.D. had introduced her to a CD of piano music, Eric Satie. It had always been the perfect music to listen to as she read. And at the end of each book was a note about the type, as if everyone didn't already know that all the books were set in Mrs. Pickering Neoclassical, a typeface inspired by a child's alphabet invented in 1848 by the wife of Elias Pickering. Mrs. Pickering, the note on the type went on, was an opium-addled former whore who, upon marrying the wealthy manufacturer of wind-up toy griffins, became so unglued by her severe childlessness and the haunting lack of story in her life that she designed a whimsical alphabet rife with curlicue and filigree, an exquisite concoction that nonetheless proved hopelessly impractical, each individual letter failing to attach to any other. In fact, the letters seemed to abhor connection, to fight against tumbling together and risk foolishly spelling out something as pandering and obvious as a word or sentence or a poem. Of course, everyone now knew that there was no such thing as a Mrs. Pickering Neoclassical. Each book was actually set in a commonly used typeface called Perpetua. But Tiff reread the note every time she came to it. She read practically everything in every book, even tapping out the numbers from the ISBN code on the roof of her mouth with the tip of her tongue. So that's one project. The other project that Carol had mentioned in the promotional materials was one on the Trans-Mississippi Exposition in Omaha, which is, I'm finishing this book, so it'll be done by my deadline in November, and then I want to start moving forward with this other book that takes place in the exposition and involves a sort of famous character from literature that I'm stealing for the purposes of this book. But I'm not going to tell you yet who that is. But so I thought I would just read just a little bit from that as well. Upon his return to Omaha in the summer of 1898 with his camera delicately disguised as a pocket watch, complete with a fake tick-tick-tick courtesy of one lone cog, Mr. Jack Forrest, long called Ferret by his pub chums for his wily profile, for the way he failed to fill out even the slimmest of his linen sack suits, snuck photographs at the Trans-Mississippi Exposition without having to drop the daily 2 bits for a camera permit. He was nonetheless far from inconspicuous, flipping open the lid of the pocket watch, uncollapsing the camera, placing a plate holder at the back, steadying the whole minute contraption in his open palm. Ferret, having spent a year at a studio in Japan, steadying his hand with the watercolor tinting of picture postcards, painting gold the 3 thin streams of gaseous loot, the intricate peonies and calico-colored koi of the tattoos of a muscular rickshaw puller, proved nimble-fingered and ambidextrous, swift at the task. Every day of the exposition, Ferret lurked, waiting to witness some moment unorchestrated by the fair's exacting composers. Among his photos, a famous one-eared female pickpocket from Chicago lifts a wallet from an unsuspecting gent mesmerized by the sight of the embalmed whale. A horse stampedes in the flower parade, knocking the elected officials of a women's society from their chrysanthemum-bedecked carriage, the eye of the wife of the mayor blackened by the tip of a reverend's wife's parasol. An orphan from the Christian home of Council Bluffs sneaks a cigarette beneath a captured Spanish flag. A man, bleeding from the head and hands, is carried from the mirror maze, having tripped face first into a glass wall, the photo titled by Ferret, "The Narcissist's Plight." An entire woman's dress, including corset, ivory-colored boots of soft kid, and a peacock-plumed hat, mysteriously abandoned on the streets of Cairo. A young woman, her finger lifted as she approaches an electric fan to test the speed of its blades. To avoid the entrance fee, he'd scale a well-hidden stretch of fence each morning and linger into the night until after the zigzag of strings of electric lights no longer reflected in the water of the lagoon. So that's a bit of a departure from what we were talking about earlier, but in relation, I suppose, to the historical research of people of the book. But some of those details are truly tales from the exposition that I discovered in photographs and in various materials. But I've given them a sort of a twist for the purposes of creating a fictional version of this real world. So I'm going to stop now because we're going on way too long. But